My throat is ready. The heart and throat had to get together and have a conversation. So again, my name is Minister Sherry Murphy. I'm with the Faith Alliance for Faith Alliance for Moral Economy. I used to be a Lyft driver. In the past 3 years, from 2017 to 2020, Lyft had been my primary source of income. I had driven over 12,000 miles. Since the recession of 2008, as a black queer woman, I know firsthand how important it is to have job benefits and labor protections in place. The COVID-19 pandemic has made it abundantly clear we have been fed the lie of scarcity, and the only scarcity we have is the anemic racial and economic conscience from corporations like Lyft and Uber. We are gathered today to call for a radical uprising of racial, economic, and political power. I say that because I know what it's like to work long hours with no guaranteed wages, no work breaks, no restrooms, no facilities, no overtime. I know what it's like to always have the looming threat of an accident with no coverage, a deactivation based on discrimination or retaliation with no protections, no remedies, and no voice. See, I know what it's like to be misclassified and having to struggle for 3 months to get unemployment in the middle of a pandemic. I know what it's like to experience lip service and support of Black lives, complete hollow words hiding behind billboard signs and big checks created by well-paid public relations teams, and absent of any promise of real change. Having corporations threaten to shut down their businesses because they can't get what they want. There are stories of drivers who have lost their lives, yet our companies once again just were nowhere to be found. There are stories of drivers who have been exposed to COVID-19, yet too afraid to stop working for fear of financial ruin. See, I know they wrote California Proposition 22 to circumvent the law that cheats workers. That PRO Act is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. It was passed in the House and is headed for the Senate. And like the third Reconstruction, it will demand to end austerity and trickle-down economics that will lead toward good policy. See, this resolution is important. It will reflect faith values of racial equity, prevention of harm, and responsibility to the most vulnerable. Make no mistake that today is about a true democracy. It is no accident that 60% of the workers are immigrants and over 70% are black and brown workers who struggle to make ends meet, who are working full-time and yet sleeping in their cars, or they can't afford child care or health care benefits. You see, it's time for a democracy that is all for all workers, regardless of whether they are sitting behind a desk or a wheel, regardless of their race, citizenship status, sexual orientation, or gender. It is time no worker, their family, their community is left behind. It is time that we act like we know that economic justice is racial justice. It is time. It is time. It is time. Amen.
What I'd like to do next is to call up Alex Katz. He is the district communications manager. Yes, sir. And I'm calling him up because we want to express our appreciation to Representative Lee for her leadership in this. And I think, Randy, you have a little something to share for on behalf of the Poor People's Campaign for Barbara Lee. Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you. Alex, on behalf of the Poor People's Campaign, I'd like to present this banner. Let's see. I'd like to present this banner on behalf of the Poor People's Campaign that's been signed by the participants here at the press conference today. And I would also like to present Representative Barbara Lee with a Poor People's Campaign T-shirt in size medium.
Thank you very much.
Hold it again. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here.
So I'm based in Oakland. I'm the child of an immigrant, and I've been a full-time activist for more like 40 years. My focus has been mainly on nuclear disarmament, opposing wars and militarism, and promoting peace. I've had the privilege of speaking at rallies and conferences around the world, including at the United Nations. So why am I here today? Well, about 35 miles from here is the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Laboratory, one of two labs that design and develop all U.S. nuclear warheads. Every year, to commemorate the August anniversaries of the 1945 U.S. atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we organize rallies, marches, and nonviolent actions at the lab to protest ongoing U.S. preparations to use again the deadliest form of weaponry ever devised. I've been arrested symbolically blocking the gates to the lab at least 30 times. This preparation to wage nuclear war isn't to protect ordinary people like us. It's to protect the corporations, the wealthiest, and the most powerful interests. As low-wage workers fight for a living wage, working during a pandemic under especially dangerous conditions, the U.S. government is planning to spend some $2 trillion over the next 30 years to maintain and modernize its apocalyptic nuclear arsenal. This isn't just a matter of guns versus butter, it's immoral. At the height of the pandemic, even though I'm a vegetarian, I participated in actions to support local low-wage McDonald's workers who were being denied proper PPE and sick pay. During those demonstrations, I realized that I felt exactly the same way I feel when I'm protesting at the Livermore lab. It's because we're fighting against the same forces of state violence, power, greed, racism, and injustice toward the same end, a more peaceful, just, sustainable, and inclusive world. From the early 2000s until we were stopped by the pandemic, my organization, Western States Legal Foundation, organized annual public participatory readings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s prophetic speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, delivered on April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year before his tragic assassination. In that speech, Dr. King declared, "I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government." He went on, "I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered." The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has picked up Dr. King's unfinished work, weaving together the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, environmental devastation, militarism and the war economy, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism in one moral fusion campaign. I celebrate my representative, Barbara Lee's decades of leadership on issues of peace and justice. And I'm proud that she is the lead sponsor of HRES 438, Third Reconstruction, fully addressing poverty and low wages from the bottom up, which comprehensively encompasses the Poor People's Campaign Moral Jubilee platform. Here's part of what it says about demilitarizing United States foreign policy, borders, and policing. There are over 140 million people who are poor, low wealth, or just one emergency away from economic ruin in the United States. But 53 cents of every federal discretionary dollar goes to the Pentagon, while only 15 cents go toward anti-poverty programs. The United States, since 2001, wars by the United States have killed more than 800,000 people and displaced 37 million more. Of the 19 million veterans in the nation, 5.4 million are on disability, nearly 38,000 are homeless, and many military families and veterans are on food assistance. Local and state enforcement agencies have received over $7.4 billion worth of equipment from the Department of Defense since 1990. And experts have identified up to $350 billion in defense spending cuts that would save resources and keep the country safe and secure. We now must heal the nation by demilitarizing U.S. foreign policy, borders, and policing, including by cutting military spending by at least 10%, ending forever wars, repealing existing authorizations of use of military force, restoring Congress's war powers, pursuing diplomacy over war, moving toward nuclear disarmament, and curtailing the use of broad economic sanctions that create mass suffering, repealing programs that provide military equipment and training to domestic law enforcement agencies, and redirecting these resources to fully address systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, and militarism. A radical revolution of values is not an option, it's an imperative. If we work together, we can achieve it. And as we like to say in the Poor People's Campaign, forward together, not one step back.
So, David, and once again, thank you everyone for coming out today, because the other side is doing some really evil stuff. Because it works for them. They make money for them, and their whole criteria for success for a good country is the stock market. So as long as their stocks are high, as long as even their 401k, forgive me for saying that, is doing good, they all right. They can walk right past a homeless person saying, that's your fault that you're homeless. That's your fault you're in poverty. Meanwhile, they support policies that make more and more and more poor people. Even just to get health care passed, the little that it is, even that was tough because we can't make any money. And so I'm glad that we're out here today making a difference. And we're not the only ones, thank God. There are people across the nation standing tall with us to make our voices heard. Because you know what? The God I serve, whether you be Buddhist or Islam, whatever your faith tradition, they're all rooted in justice. Nobody should starve. You shouldn't. They say, well, you live in the richest country in the world. It's probably the most immoral country in the world. Because the systems don't care about the poor. And in my tradition, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, General Minister and President Terry Hort Owens says, the disciples of Christ are fully on board and committed to the work of the Poor People's Campaign, and in particular the Third Reconstruction. Because the Third Reconstruction is about justice. As everybody has said, the Third Reconstruction is about reconstructing, and I will say reimagining, a society where all people benefit, where no one goes hungry, where no one is homeless, where everybody and every person is treated as a child of God. And unfortunately, many people don't feel like many of us are created like in God's image. That's actually what people think. So be aware of that. And that's not a religious statement. That's just a fact. This country is found in slavery, exploitation. And it's trying to hold on to that by suppressing voting rights. And so we're called together because of injustice. We're called together because somebody said the rent's too damn high. You know, David, I'm a veteran, and I was on an aircraft carrier. And they are huge. I was on Dwight D. Eisenhower. It cost billions and billions and billions of dollars. No matter how many miles could be fed, how many houses could be built by one carrier, one budget for a carrier. But they don't care about that. And so I just want to say thank you, everybody, for standing tall and standing up and making your voice heard, because for us today and generations to come, the voices will be heard. And finally, please don't get frustrated, because this is the third Reconstruction. Right? The first one was what? The Civil War. Of course, they assassinated Reconstruction after the Civil War. The second one was the Civil Rights Movement, of which we all benefit from. And now we're on the third one. So you got to hang in there. It's a generational fight. It's a generational struggle. And so as we end this wonderful, necessary call for justice for 140 million poor and low-wage folks, who many of them are veterans, by the way, who gave their lives for this country, know that the God of all that is good and just and right and life-giving calls us to this work, has ordained this work, because this work is sacred. Amen.
Housing. We need a third Reconstruction to revive our political commitment to moral laws and policies that can heal and transform the nation. Whereas there are 30 to 40 million people at risk of homelessness, whereas only 1/4 of eligible families receive federal housing assistance, whereas household debt burdens have grown to staggering levels, and half our families find it hard to pay for usual household expenses. We must now heal the nation by guaranteeing safe and quality housing for all, ending all evictions and canceling past due rent and mortgage payments, expanding the stock of good quality affordable housing, and providing public housing and rental assistance rather than expanding the shelter system. When we lift from the bottom, everybody rises.
Amen. Amen.
On education, we need a third Reconstruction to revive our political commitment to moral laws and policies that can heal and transform the nation. Whereas systemic racism takes the form of laws and policies that target people of color, especially poor people of color, to create and deepen inequalities in education, we must now heal the nation by guaranteeing diverse, safe, high-quality, equitable public education, guaranteeing accessible education infrastructure from pre-K-12 for all children, ensuring that higher education is free to everyone who wants to attend, protecting and expanding public resources for students with disabilities, and enacting relief from student debt. When we lift from the bottom, everybody rises.
This is the jobs guarantee. We need a third Reconstruction to revive our political commitment to moral laws and policies that can heal and transform the nation. Whereas nearly 50 million people are working for low wages, whereas more than 25 million workers have been directly hurt by the economic impacts of the pandemic, and more than half of the low-wage jobs that were lost have not returned. Whereas alongside mounting poverty, low wealth, debt, and economic desperation, poor communities and poor communities of color are hit first and worst by climate change, pollution, extreme weather, climate disaster, ecological devastation, and related health disparities, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. We must now heal the nation by implementing a federal jobs guarantee to increase public investments and infrastructure in poor and low-income communities that prioritize green and socially beneficial industries, public health, public education, care work, public transit and roads, public utilities, broadband, sanitation and water services, climate resilience, sustainable food production and distribution, libraries, fire stations, and cultural work. When we lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Thank you.